More than 60% of Americans say they're living paycheck to paycheck. Household credit card debt has surpassed $1 trillion. In many cities, rent now consumes nearly half of median income. At the same time, vehicle dwelling has grown enough that cities are creating parking programs and passing new restrictions. 8 years ago, when I moved into my vehicle, it was for adventure. Van life was trending. I felt intentional, voluntary, a way to experience freedom on my own terms. That is not what I'm seeing now. I meet full-time workers who clock in every morning and still sleep in parking lots, veterans who serve their country and now can't afford rent in the cities they live in, families with children rotating between safe parking programs, older adults who thought they were set for retirement, watching fixed incomes shrink against rising costs, people who had apartments last year and vehicles this year. Parking lots are more crowded, enforcement is tighter, the tone is different. This doesn't feel like a lifestyle wave, it feels like displacement. And if that's happening quietly, what does that say about the middle class? Before anyone sleeps in a vehicle, they exhaust every other option. They pick up second and third jobs, they drive rideshare after 10-hour shifts, they sell clothes and electronics online, they donate plasma for grocery money, they flip furniture, they resell whatever they can for a small profit. They stretch food budgets at discount stores and hope prices don't rise again next month. In many cities, rent has increased more than 20% in just a few years. Auto insurance premiums have surged, utilities are higher, childcare in some areas exceeds $15,000 a year. Even basic repairs now feel destabilizing. So people adjust, they delay dentist visits, they ignore small medical issues, they run credit cards close to their limits. They refinance cars into longer loans, they move back in with parents, they split apartments with roommates well into their 30s and 40s. Stability starts to feel temporary. You can afford this month, maybe next month, but one disruption changes everything. A layoff, a rent hike, a medical bill, a transmission failure. When housing alone absorbs nearly half of someone's income, the rest of life becomes negotiation. Savings shrink quietly, debt becomes routine, stress becomes constant, and most people don't see it as collapse. They see it as getting through the year. But when surviving requires this much effort, something underneath is already breaking. That's when people start considering options they once thought were extreme. For decades, the middle class revolved around a simple promise. Work hard, buy a home, raise a family, retire with dignity, do a little better than your parents did. That promise shaped how people planned their lives. But the cost of stepping into that life has changed. In the 1970s, the typical home cost roughly 3 times the median household income. In many parts of the country today, that number has doubled. Down payments that once felt achievable now require $60,000, $80,000, sometimes $100,000 just to get in the door. Childcare can cost more than a year of college tuition. Health insurance premiums have doubled over the last 20 years. Property taxes, utilities, car insurance, all higher. But the foundation is shifting. You can still buy a home if 2 incomes remain stable, if layoffs don't interrupt cash flow, if interest rates cooperate, if no emergency forces you into debt. That is a fragile formula, and fragility is not stability. People feel it even if they don't say it out loud. They postpone having children. They carry debt longer than planned. They delay retirement contributions. They accept financial stress as normal. The dream didn't disappear. It just got expensive enough that fewer people can enter it. And when the dream becomes financially out of reach, alternatives stop looking irresponsible. They start looking rational. Over the last few decades, something else has happened quietly. The economy has split. On one side are people who own assets, real estate, stocks, businesses. On the other, there are people who rely primarily on wages. Since 2020, trillions of dollars in wealth were added to the stock market and the housing market. Homeowners saw equity surge, investors saw portfolios expand. Asset prices climbed rapidly, but wages did not rise at the same pace. The top 10% of households now control the majority of total wealth in the country. The bottom half owns a small fraction by comparison. That gap has widened steadily since the 1980s. Inflation doesn't hit everyone the same way. If you own appreciating assets, inflation can increase your net worth. If you rent and depend on income, inflation increases your expenses. That difference compounds. This isn't just about hard work, it's about position. Risk used to sit more heavily with institutions, pensions, long-term employment, defined benefits. Today, risk is individualized. Retirement accounts fluctuate with markets. Healthcare costs shift to households. Job security is thinner. Meanwhile, essential costs keep climbing. Call it policy, call it market forces, call it greed. But the result is clear. One side accumulates, the other side absorbs. And when you're on the absorbing side long enough, well, you start looking for leverage. At the same time this wealth gap widened, job stability weakened. Layoffs that once felt shocking now feel routine. Over the past few years, hundreds of thousands of workers across tech, media, finance, and retail have been cut. Entire departments eliminated in a single email. Roles that looked secure one quarter, gone the next. And it's not just recessions anymore, it's restructuring, automation, efficiency. Artificial intelligence has accelerated that pressure. Companies are discovering they can produce the same output with fewer people. Customer service, marketing, copy, design work, coding assistance, tasks that once required teams can now be partially automated. Even when AI doesn't replace someone completely, it raises expectations. Fewer workers are expected to handle more responsibility. Productivity targets increase. Competition intensifies. That changes behavior. If your income feels uncertain, you hesitate to lock yourself into high fixed costs. A 12-month lease feels heavier. A 30-year mortgage feels riskier. Taking on new debt feels dangerous. The old agreement was stability in exchange for loyalty. Now, loyalty doesn't guarantee stability. So people adapt preemptively. They lower commitments. They diversify income. They keep options open. And for some, reducing housing costs become the most powerful move available. Because when your job can disappear quickly, flexibility becomes more valuable than permanence. And once permanence feels risky, people start reevaluating everything. The traditional middle-class model was built on permanence, a fixed address, a long-term mortgage, a stable employer, predictable routines, rootedness. Stability used to mean staying put, but when housing costs rise faster than wages and job security feels thinner, permanence becomes expensive. A 30-year mortgage assumes consistent income. A 12-month lease assumes stability. High fixed expenses assume nothing goes wrong. That's a big assumption in today's economy. So something subtle is happening. Instead of optimizing for permanence, more people are optimizing for flexibility. Lower fixed costs, shorter commitments, mobility over ownership, liquidity over long-term debt. For decades, the middle class measured success by how anchored you were. Now for some, security is starting to look like the ability to move. That doesn't mean everyone is choosing vehicles out of preference, but when you remove rent from the equation, you remove your largest fixed obligation. That changes how much risk you can absorb. It changes how long you can survive without income. It changes your negotiating power with your employers. The old system rewarded staying. This one rewards adaptability. And when the cost of staying keeps climbing, mobility starts to feel less like rebellion and more like strategy. There's something else happening most people aren't paying attention to. Vehicle living isn't just increasing, it's normalizing. Cities are creating safe parking programs, retail lots are posting new restrictions, online communities are growing rapidly. Entire YouTube niches exist around surviving on the road. When it becomes big enough to manage, restrict, or control, that tells you it isn't temporary. It's structural change. And when more working adults choose mobility over rent, that changes how we define stability. If enough people step outside traditional housing, landlords feel it, employers feel it, cities feel it. This isn't just individuals downsizing, it's behavior shifting at scale. And once a behavior becomes normalized, it spreads faster. That's what makes this moment different from 2018. Back then, it felt optional. Now, for many, it feels practical. And practical movements tend to grow. If this continues, the middle class doesn't disappear overnight. It stops functioning. The middle class has always been the stabilizing layer, the tax base, the homeowners, the long-term planners, the families anchoring communities. If housing remains out of reach, if asset ownership keeps concentrating, if wages lag while costs compound, if job security thins further, the middle class doesn't explode, it fragments. More people rent indefinitely. More households carry debt permanently. More adults delay children or skip them entirely. More workers stay mobile because staying put feels risky. And when stability becomes conditional, people stop making long-term commitments. They stop buying. They stop planting roots. They stop believing the system will reward patience. And when enough people stop committing long-term, the structure that depended on them weakens. The middle class wasn't just an income bracket, it was behavioral. It trusted the future. If that trust erodes, the country doesn't collapse, it shifts. And once that shift passes a certain threshold, reversing it becomes almost impossible. Now, if mobility is becoming more common, there's a hard question we have to ask. What happens if access tightens? Public lands can be restricted. Cities can increase enforcement. Retail parking policies can change overnight. The more visible vehicle living becomes, the more likely it is to be regulated. Depending entirely on tolerance isn't a long-term strategy. So here's the idea. What if mobility had infrastructure? No corporations, not developers, but a decentralized network of small land nodes owned by individuals, scattered across the states, connected through community agreements, safe places to park, reset points, seasonal hubs, not massive compounds, not communes, just distributed access. Think of it as redundancy. If public land disappears in one region, there's another option. If enforcement increases, there's a fallback. If someone needs a safe place to stay during a transition, there's network instead of isolation. This isn't about abandoning society, it's about not being entirely dependent on systems that are tightening. If the economy is concentrating, then resilience has to decentralize. And if mobility is the adaptation, land access is the leverage. The future may belong to those who prepare quietly. Now, if you are feeling this shift too, you're not imagining it. That's why I started Nomad Syndicate. In just a few months, over 8,600 people have joined, not to panic, not to complain, but to prepare, to compare strategies, to think ahead instead of reacting late. This isn't about escaping society, it's about understanding where things are headed. Because this isn't a one video conversation, we're going to keep breaking this down. Housing, AI displacement, mobility, land access, risk concentration. The middle class didn't disappear overnight, and it won't be rebuilt overnight either. So, if you want to stay ahead of what's unfolding, subscribe. This shift is still early, and we are just getting started.